You know how sometimes you go down these rabbit holes on Wikipedia and suddenly you look up and hours have passed?
Yeah.
Like you just disappear down the black hole of information.
Uh-huh. Yeah, I know exactly what you mean.
That's kind of the vibe for today's deep dive, I think. We're going deep on MySQL.
MySQL.
Yeah. It's this behind-the-scenes tech thing, but it powers a lot of the websites and apps that you probably use. I'm assuming we all use every day.
Yeah, it's pretty wild when you realize just how much of our digital lives really relies on software that we never even think about.
I know, right? And your sources don't just cover the techie stuff, which we're going to get into, but they also get into like what entrepreneurs, business owners, whatever, can learn from the journey of MySQL. So kind of excited to dig into that.
Yeah, sounds fascinating.
Okay, so first things first, for those of us who maybe didn't take Coding 101, what exactly is MySQL? This article mentions like Facebook, Google, Twitter
Oh, yeah.
using it, so it's got to be something important.
We're talking heightens of industry. And yeah, they all depend on MySQL in some way, shape, or form. Basically, imagine a digital filing cabinet, right? But instead of having like, manila folders, it's holding these massive, massive amounts of data. And the thing is, it's organized perfectly and it can pull up exactly the information you need in an instant. That's MySQL in a nutshell.
So it's like this super organized brain of these massive websites.
Exactly. Technically, it's called a relational database management system, RDBMS for short.
Catchy.
Right. But all that means is it takes all this data and it organizes it into these neat little tables and columns, makes it lightning fast to sift through and find whatever you need. That Google search you did this morning, MySQL is probably involved.
Oh, wow. Okay. So this article I'm looking at, it keeps saying open source this, open source that.
Yeah.
What is that all about? And like, why should we even care?
Yeah, that's a key piece of the MySQL story. Open source just means that the actual code that makes MySQL work is freely available. Like anyone can look at it, use it, modify it, even distribute it. Think of it like a really killer cookie recipe, but anyone can use it, tweak it, share it.
So it's like a community recipe project, but for software that's like running a good chunk of the internet.
Exactly. And that whole open approach was huge for MySQL's success. Because developers all over the globe could contribute, it meant that they were constantly making it better. And for businesses, it meant that they weren't stuck relying on just one company's tech, which was a big deal back then.
Okay, that makes a lot more sense. And speaking of business, this article talks about how they use this freemium model. Like it's free to use, but then you pay for the fancy stuff. It seems like everyone and their mother is doing that these days. Were they kind of like pioneers in that way?
I mean, they were definitely ahead of the curve with that. It wasn't totally unheard of back then, but they really used it brilliantly. They gave away this very capable version of MySQL for free, and that helped them build this massive user base really, really fast. But then for companies that needed those extra features or dedicated support, more advanced tools, they offered paid versions.
So it's like they were giving you just enough to get you hooked. And then,
Exactly.
hey, you want the good stuff, you got to pay.
They understood the power of letting people experience the value firsthand, and then,
Shing.
pretty much.
Yeah.
Yeah, $1 billion will definitely get people's attention, that's for sure.
So did Sun Microsystems just buy them and like shut them down? Or what happened to MySQL after that whole thing went through?
It wasn't quite that simple. I mean, at first it seemed like Sun Microsystems, they really got the whole open source thing. They kept developing MySQL, and they even released it under this thing called a dual licensing model.
Dual licensing. Okay, that sounds a little, explain to me like I'm Filet. What's that all about?
Basically, they offered MySQL in two ways. One was under the same open source license, so, think back to that whole community recipe idea.
Right, right.
But then they also offered it under a commercial license.
Okay.
So it gave companies more choices depending on like what they needed and how much they were willing to spend.
So they were trying to like keep the community happy, but also,
Make some money.
exactly. Okay, so that's Sun Microsystems. But then this article I'm looking at, it mentions Oracle coming into the picture. And wasn't Oracle already like a big deal in the whole database world?
Oh, yeah. Oracle was like the 800-pound gorilla in the database world at that point.
Okay.
And so when they acquired Sun Microsystems a few years later, a lot of people, especially in the tech community, they started getting a little nervous about the future of MySQL as an open source project.
Yeah, because you've got this giant corporation coming in to take over something that was built on this whole idea of like openness and sharing. I can see why that might make people a little uneasy. What were they worried about specifically?
The big fear was that Oracle would try to, for lack of a better term, close the doors on the code, like make it harder for businesses to use it without paying some hefty licensing fees.
Which kind of goes against the whole spirit of the thing, right?
Exactly.
Speaking of spirit, this MySQL community thing keeps coming up in these articles I'm reading. It sounds like it was like a really big deal. So it wasn't just people like calling up tech support, right? It was something more than that.
Oh, yeah, you're right. The MySQL community, it was and still is a huge part of what makes MySQL. Remember, we were talking about the whole open source approach. It wasn't just about the code itself. It was about creating this whole ecosystem of developers, users, just tech enthusiasts, really, who were all passionate about MySQL. So they contributed to the development, they helped each other troubleshoot problems, they shared knowledge. It was a real team effort.
So it's less about like corporate control and more about like shared ownership and all that.
Exactly.
I love that. Okay, so that's all super interesting, but like, what does this all have to do with me? I mean, I'm not coding the next Facebook over here. What's the takeaway for the average person?
Yeah.
So there's got to be something in this whole MySQL story for like the rest of us, right?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, that's where these, what do they call them, lessons for entrepreneurs come in. These articles, they all seem to agree that there's real wisdom in MySQL's journey, even if you're not, a tech person.
Okay, so what are those lessons? Give me the Cliff Notes version.
Well, one of the big ones is just the power of being open, like how MySQL used open source to build this amazing community. Being open to collaboration, feedback, that can lead to some crazy innovation and growth no matter what you're working on.
Right, so don't be afraid to like share the secret sauce a little.
Exactly. And remember that whole the freemium thing we were talking about?
Yeah, get a little.
That's a whole lesson in itself, right? I mean, they figured out how to give away something super valuable for free to get people in the door.
Right.
But then they also had a smart strategy for actually, making money. It's a tough balance for a lot of businesses to figure out how do you be accessible, but also like keep the lights on?
Right, don't be too greedy, but also you got to eat.
Exactly. And what about the fact that they basically like blew up overnight, that rapid growth? Everybody wants that, right?
Yeah, who doesn't love a good overnight success story?
Right. But MySQL, even they ran into some challenges, just trying to keep up with everything. They grew so fast that it was hard to manage all the support, all the expectations, all of that. It's a good reminder that sometimes going slow and steady, making sure you've got a solid foundation before you hit the gas.
It's like they say, slow and steady wins the race.
Yeah, sometimes. Any other takeaways from the MySQL saga that we want to highlight?
I mean, this whole community thing has really stuck with me. It seems like they had a really special thing going on there.
Oh, for sure. And that's something anyone can learn from, right? No matter what you're passionate about, if you can build those connections, create that sense of community, of shared ownership, it can make all the difference in the world.
So I guess the lesson here is find your people.
Find your people. 100%.
Wow, this has been, I'm not going to lie, this has been a trip. I always thought of MySQL as like this super technical thing, but it turns out there's a lot we can all take away from their story, techie or not.
Yeah.
So, any final thoughts? If there was one big thing you want people to remember from all of this, what would it be?
One big thing. I think it's that some of the most important innovations, they can come from the most unexpected places. Like, who would have thought that a piece of software most people have never even heard of would have such a huge impact on the world? And it all came down to these really basic ideas, being open, being community-minded, being willing to adapt and evolve. Those are things that matter, whether you're building the next big tech company or, like you said, just running a bakery.
I love that. So much wisdom from like a database.
Right. Who knew?
Well, there you have it, folks, our deep dive on MySQL. We covered a lot of ground today, its history, how it changed the way we live, and the surprising lessons it holds for all of us, no matter what we do. Until next time.